What's cooler than being cool? Joining us on Cool People, Cool Tech, Cool Stories, the podcast that explores the intersections of inspiring technology, fascinating people, and captivating stories, or a combination of all three. Get ready to embrace your inner cool kid as we go behind the scenes with today's innovators and storytellers. I'm your host, Cameron Kidd. I'm the founder of Yo-Yo's, a video production company, and I here have the privilege of talking to Rishi Saurabh, who is the data dynamo and a healthcare superhero. I really do think you are. You work at Philips. He's worked as a director of marketing and customer insights at other large enterprise companies in healthcare and in tech. He's led analytics teams, and today he's finding ways to use AI where it will actually work for good. With a career that reads like a high tech thriller, Rishi has used his entrepreneurial mindset to help enterprise companies change healthcare with data. Rishi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
I'm glad to be here on just another part of your exciting journey. So, first question: were you a cool kid growing up?
Ah, I was not actually. I was not a cool kid, but I was definitely one of those who created enough troubles. It's funny. If you talk to my mom, she still has nightmares. Like whose glass did he break, or which kid got injured, like those kind of stuff. So I was always getting into trouble. That was my thing.
I feel like that's kind of a, but now you're getting into trouble again, but in a good way, right? Like in your
Mm,
life.
yeah. The magnitude of trouble and the way you get into trouble changes, but you still try to find opportunities. That's what gives you a kick in life. That's
So, just so I understand, you were getting hurt. Like, what were you doing? Were you like making skate ramps?
Cricket was a big thing, and I used
Uh-huh.
to play basketball for school as well.
Uh-huh.
So those sports was a big thing, and we used to like it was a small society. We used to live together, a bunch of us. So playing crickets, and then we didn't have right equipment, so balls used to go smash windows, breaking window panes, or some fight breaks out in the basketball court, and then it becomes a chaos. Right?
Some fight
Someone,
breaks out. We don't know who or why. I don't know
I
how
know.
it got started.
At one point, we were out there in the park, and there was a beehive that broke from the tree and fell on the ground. Right, so I was like, "Oh, how does a beehive look inside?" And that's a bad idea. That's basically a bad idea, right? And what I did,
Wait. So there's a huge mass of bees swarming, and your first thought is, let me get closer. I gotta check this out.
yeah,
Um, yeah, you got
but
stung.
I was smart to say that I don't want to go alone because the bees will attack me. So I got a group of people. It's like we'll go to go check out. We'll get honey out of it. And they were like, that's a brilliant idea. So these morons trusted me. And I jump in onto the beehive. Well, let's first break it and then we will open it up, right? So I jump on it and I run away. And all the bees, I got a couple stings, but the guy behind me was slow. He got more. And then there was chaos in the society that these kids all got stung by bee.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
so, so not a popular kid. Yeah, got in trouble. Quite
I'm
often.
gonna relate this back somehow to your work of like jumping on the beehive and then running away. I think this is like a really interesting thing. I stepped on a yellow jacket's nest when I was 11, and there was no one else around, so I was just getting stung like crazy. My reaction was to fall to the ground in the fetal position and then I guess like wait for death. That's kind of embarrassing for me. Like ever since then I was like I need to study martial arts and have better fight or flight reflex. Luckily my grandpa came out and saved me, but very different experience because I did not plan on stepping on it. It was not my conscious choice. But yeah, that's great. That's a good example of trouble. So to go to go completely the opposite direction and go to work, you've had a really amazing journey. You know, you were at GE Health, you're at Philips. You've really found, I think, a niche in data and analytics and healthcare. What gets you excited these days about healthcare, about AI, about data?
It's just a lot of things. I'm like, healthcare is such an interesting area that there's so many things broken that you pick one thing and you fix it, and it creates an impact. I'm like, the point is, one of my cousin, he works for LinkedIn, and he was telling me that I mess up, a wrong ad shows up on LinkedIn, right, or Meta or something like that. You mess up, someone dies, right? So the cost benefit is pretty high, and I think the thing that drives me primarily is that any small improvement I can bring in creates such a huge impact on the hospital side of things. And to be honest with you, I'm like I wanted to be a doctor as a kid, despite being a troubled kid, right? I always wanted to be a doctor, but I wasn't smart to get into a med school, right? And then this is the closest I get in saying that, you know what, if I can be a doctor, at least I can work with to help these doctors, right? Get something done out of it. So that's what excites me about healthcare specifically, and the data and the AI part of it. I'm like AI is a fascinating. It's opening up a lot of opportunities
Mm-hmm.
right now. And but the part with the healthcare systems today, if you look at it, right, they're still struggling. It is so siloed anywhere around the world. It is so siloed that data essentially is the next currency. And I keep talking to people that it's, it is the next currency, but this currency is not similar to other currencies that work. That hey, the more you have, the better it is, right? This
Huh.
currency works differently. It's the value of the currency. So the sexier note that you have, the better it is. So it's not about how many notes do you have, but the sexier one you have is better it is, right? So how do you get to the point where you can actually make sure that the hospitals have clean data so that they can make use of it, right? And
Hmm.
not the volume of data, terabytes, petabytes, those don't make sense much. What makes sense is that is the data reliable? Can you use it to take patient care?
I
I don't
mean,
know if that makes sense though. I was rambling.
well, no, I like this using the like the currency analogy. I mean, in one way, data already is currency for Facebook, Google, right? Like our data is the currency of a lot of these big data companies and tech companies. But for if you're using a currency analogy, it's like more is bad. It's like inflation, right? The hospitals are like Venezuela. They have like inflation. They have too much data, so the data's worthless, right? They're like, I can't spend this. Maybe that's the problem. Is more is not better. Cleaner is better. Interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, well, I had done some. I remember reading about this in the US, like right around the time of the Civil War, there were like different currencies all around the United States. And so, like, everyone was like making their own weird dollars and coins. And one of the things that the government did, at least in the North, that I think kind of precipitated one of the many things that precipitated the war was trying to like get everyone on the dollar. So it's just funny to think about everyone using different stuff. I think that's also similar for hospitals or any
yeah.
organization. Is like everyone, a lot of times it's like everyone's using different dollars and coins as well. So I like that analogy. I think that makes sense. So what's exciting to you is getting clean data and like making like actionable small steps instead of like these big sweeping platitudes.
Yeah, it is, and I think in my career in the past, I've made like a gazillion mistakes, like stepping on the Beehive and stuff like that, right?
I
In the
love that.
corporate world too, right? Wherein I've tried to boil the ocean in my past life, right? To say that let's boil the ocean, I'll go for volume and stuff like that. And then you think about it and then you come back and you say, that's next to impossible. You don't get anything out of it other than having a good news article around, okay, this company collected 40 terabytes or petabytes of data. You don't get anything out of it. So I think I got this opportunity to focus, zoom in, and got beaten down enough by the market to learn, and then come back to a point saying that, you know what, let's focus on a meaningful change and work backwards. And that's the same thing with AI too. That it's not just about how cool is AI. It's like what problem can it solve? Is there a problem in mind that you can think of that AI can solve? And that's why I think it becomes important and interesting. I don't know if that makes sense though.
Yeah. I mean, I think boiling the ocean is part of the problem right now with AI is that it's almost like there's like an overwhelm of excitement on possibilities and not quite as much actionable insight. You and I talked about like the machine learning applications of radiology scans catching breast cancer. That's happening. But when there's like a lot of like talk and concepts. And when it comes to actually applying it, and getting it to work, that's really hard. It's like here's one of my analogies is these healthcare workers are like um, instead of saying we're fighting someone, it's like stormship troopers, right? They're fighting bugs, they're fighting illness, they're on the front lines, they're like soldiers, and we're coming down and saying like, you know, here's a parachute, and they're like, I don't need a parachute. Like they're like, I don't need that. I think what you're saying is like asking what how is it going to actually solve a certain problem. So to reverse the question, like what's cool to a hospital? Because when I think of what's cool as a layman potential patient, I'm like, oh, robots, tech, right? But like, what's cool to them?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question because if you look at from a hospital perspective, right? They all signed up to become clinicians, right? They all signed up to either become doctors, nurses, and things like that. But you go into a doctor's office, half the time the doctor is sitting in front of you with a laptop, essentially taking notes, right? Nurses, they are struggling to make sure that patients who are lying on the bedside, yes, I need to take care of that patient, but I got to factor in time and make sure I got the blood pressure reading correct and the other readings correct because I won't get paid eventually because of a lack of that. So I think one of the biggest aspects of us is this: how do we reduce the administrative burden on these hospitals? And that's kind of the big thing, because of which a lot of nurses and doctors are leaving their jobs. Like, I didn't sign up for this. How do you reduce the administrative burden of hospitals? Where are these administrative burdens? I'll give you an interesting story. I was at in a hospital recently in Florida, and they have a concept called runner. Do you know a runner concept in a hospital? No, it's an interesting concept. I didn't know that. That guy is fit. So absolutely fit. Literally, he or she is a runner. What? So a patient needs to get a telemetry thing, right? And this guy basically gets an order saying, okay, this unit needs a telemetry device. This guy literally carries a plastic bag with telemetry and he runs because hospitals are big, right? He runs from one corridor to the other, takes that device, hands it over there, and then gets like few stickers on it, and then goes back to the different unit, runs there, hands over the telemetry, his job is done. He does this all day, right?
Okay, I'm sorry. What you're describing is what we used in like medieval Europe and ancient like Rome and Greece and ancient Asia, right? The king would make an order and a runner would go bring something, right? Like that's this is like really interesting. It makes sense
It's a
though.
legit
It
job.
does make sense. It's smart. It's fast.
And it's
Yeah,
a legit job.
he's
But the point
fit.
is, he's fit. But my point is that I was like, why can't units start to stack a bunch of that equipment so when they need it and they can project it out to say that, you know what, I'm going to fall short of these units by tomorrow. Can we get a surplus of that? So that having a runner get it delivered to that unit before time and stuff like that is because they don't understand how utilization works.
Hmm.
How do I manage the utilization of devices? How do I avoid nurses hoarding equipments under their cupboards and stuff like that? How do we do that? And that these are small administrative burdens that doctors need to go through because they're on the patient bedside. I need this thing, doesn't work. So I think the huge opportunity is the administrative burden reduction, which
Hmm.
is huge. And that's why I think a lot of artificial intelligence, the true ones are coming in there to say that how can I reduce the administrative burden from your hospital side.
Yeah, that's
That,
that's what's cool to them, right?
yeah, that is cool to them because you know what, that's leading to nurse satisfaction. I want my job because I'm actually focused on what I signed up to do, right? I'm not just doing paperwork all day.
Yeah. It's the same thing
That's
cops say. It's all these different. But I've heard this, right? Nurses and doctors, some of the doctors in like primary care see 50 patients a day, and they're also expected to dictate notes into the electronic health record. And I've heard this from lots of different organizations. It's just like the sheer amount of work expected to get done, and then if one little thing gets missed, then we have a whole campaign about seeing the whole patient and making sure we're capturing all the data, and the doctor's like, yeah, 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 I'm trying, like I'm doing my best. It sounds like the thing that would help them is like the concept of the AI agents and like the that's being bandied about of having kind of like a her style administrator who does stuff for you, right? My dream for having an AI agent is someone who can reschedule my appointments. And that will be scary to think about having that access to your healthcare data, but things like that will help them take notes. Is that what you're saying? That's where AI might be
a
most
lot,
useful?
a lot of it, from note taking to documentation,
Hmm.
simple tasks that has to be done on a repetitive basis. The task that needs to be done on a repetitive basis and has a pattern to it, a machine can be trained to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that's
So,
that's one area that I feel is super important. The second area which I feel is it gets to your idea of diagnosis, right? the example that you gave about the breast cancer and how does that sort of play a role is, if I'm a doctor, if I'm an experienced doctor, I probably have gone through literature and I understand the rationale behind it. And I think IBM Watson tried to do that in the past, where they were like, okay, an AI will actually go back and refer to the literature and come back with recommendations and stuff
Whoa,
like that.
that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. And then the point is that if I have to literally go and refer to 15 journals and understand the nuances of literature to really figure out what is this disease and what are the potential outcomes of this. I'm not saying replacing the doctor, but I'm saying assisting the doctors in making clinical decisions.
Of course, we would never replace, right?
Yeah.
They would never. We're gonna replace. No, but I like the idea of having. It's almost like having like a couple residents who are sitting there running the books, right? And you can consult them the way House in the TV show House would like sit down with his residents and be like, talk it out, right? So like that's one of the ways in documentary film that producers and filmmakers actually use AI is they'll upload transcripts to ChatGPT or whatever large language model, and then they'll talk to it about the interview and say, well, yeah, what parts do you think were interesting, or what parts did he talk about his father the most, and like literally like use it to kind of discuss that. That's an interesting concept as well, as like helping them with
But
diagnosis in that way.
here is where companies struggle then in that case. That I don't want my company's name on that AI agent if that recommendation goes wrong.
Which it will, because these are like humans, right? AI is becoming more and more like people. They make mistakes, they have hallucinations. I see what you're
Exactly.
saying. No one's brave enough to put their name on it because the doctor's going to blame the AI for the bad
Because
diagnosis.
think
Uh-huh.
about it, like essentially, Watson started to do this interesting thing in the past where they were saying, let's say a cancer patient walks in, right? And has all the reports been done on him, or all the exams have been done on this patient, and the doctor is sitting down, an AI agent will run and really understand what is the if and doctor will get a list in front of him. So if you and I are sitting, I have my laptop in front of me, I get a list of things and I could say, if I can get this one exam done, my probability of diagnosing cancer will go from 80 to 86% or 90%. Saying, okay, the doctor's like, you should go get this exam done. So, okay, fair enough. The results come in like, okay, with 90% probability, I can say this guy has a colon cancer or whatever it is, right? That's great. But the point is, who puts their name on it?
Yeah, right. I'm thinking about this just like nobody wants their doctor going on ChatGPT in front of them, right? That doesn't make me feel confident. And so
No,
if there's,
the problem is
but
the one that goes wrong. And
what if it
that's
goes wrong? So yeah, if I have like Cameron.ai and he uses my thing and then he doesn't diagnose it correctly, or the guy dies because he didn't diagnose it correctly, then I'm screwed, right? Cameron.ai is the reason this man died. Okay,
yep.
that's back to your point about the original thing where it's like on LinkedIn I can mess up, in a hospital you can't, right? There's like they have to be conservative naturally because everything's on the line,
And that
and
is why
it's
I
tough.
feel that is
Yeah.
why I feel the administrative part is the easier thing to do. Is like, because
Yeah.
there are opportunities for helping the doctors so much in that side, that let's start with that, get them basic help that they're spending so much time on, which can be better spent.
And so you have to use psychology to overcome the fact that like the word admin and all this stuff isn't sexy, but this is what's going to lead to
Yeah,
making all these positive changes. Part of the reason it isn't sexy is because nobody wants to do it, right? Like a good administrator is worth so much money, like somebody who can manage that mentally. Interesting. So this is something where you can actually start helping people now and actually make a big difference. So is there a company who's going to be willing to put their name on the admin bot that
yeah.
takes
I think
notes
a
for
lot
you?
of companies are trying to do it actually. That's,
Yeah.
I think the industry is smart enough to recognize that. And I'm not saying there's a lack of innovation happening on the clinical side. There's a lot going on the clinical side too. But I think administrative part of it is like, if you walk into an emergency department today, the the amount of time a patient spends in the ED today waiting to be called in, the wait times in the ED, and then getting triaged to either a bed or being sent home is huge. And what if AI can actually help you? reduce that burden through virtual assistants, things like that. A lot of companies have popped up in that area and they're starting to do that. That's smart. Google actually, with acquisition of DeepMind and few other things, they did a good job of getting to the clinical part. Probably, I love that innovation from the Google side, where they actually could scan a retina and then start to identify multiple disease factors that can come in.
What?
Yeah.
You
So
mean,
that,
wait. They're going to scan my eye like in Minority Report and then tell me that I have low blood sugar?
yeah. Oh,
All right, that's sci-fi. That's cool to me. Okay, you just hit on one. I was like, okay, what's cool? That is so interesting because most of the stuff I hear about using AI and cameras is like recording where my eye goes in Walgreens to see what liquid beverage I'm going to be most interested in, right? Like we're using dilation and stuff to measure like people's choices for for companies. But the idea of like actually being able to scan my, how does that even work? How can you tell what's
there's
going on with
I forget the name of the company. I think it's DeepMind. That was an acquisition way back.
deep eye?
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Yeah, so that's really cool.
Yeah, and a lot of companies are doing it, but the point is, why don't we then see success, or don't you as a patient don't even know about it, right? And why
Hmm.
don't we see success of this sort of things in the hospital when we walk in to get treated?
Yeah, that's kind of my next question is just like you're going into hospitals day in day out and looking at it with your entrepreneurial mind and all this like experience you have and you're listening. And like it's really hard to not go in there and be like, "Wow, this place is hard to navigate. This place is a mess or whatever," and like let go of you're listening to what they're saying. Where where are like these healthcare providers, these hospitals struggling the most in your opinion? Like what are the biggest gaps for them? Because like, I know we're going to be like everything. But like what's the
No, no,
thing
no, I'm
that's
not. I
biggest?
think I feel it, and I think when we started to work on the data side, on the Philips aspect of it, right? That was the thing, that we could go ahead and solve world hunger, right? But that was not the intent. The intent was to really listen to two or three problems very closely and go deeper
Mhm.
uh, with them. So an administrative thing came in a lot. I saw nurses sticking a USB stick into a patient monitor and try to get data out of it, or trying to get data out of different places and then put it in a spreadsheet. And they're like, oh wow, now I got a CSV file. I convert it into a pivot table. And I'm like, really? Is that what you signed up for? Can I just automate that simple part of pulling the data and putting it into a chart on a Google Sheet so you can just play with it?
Yeah.
And they were like, "Yeah, that'll be helpful. That'll save me 4 hours." Right. So I think
Yeah.
that those are the nuances we start to look at it. I'm like, think about it. Today, if a patient dies in a hospital, there is a huge audit that happens a week or so. What happened? What medications the patient was on? What were the blood pressure readings, and what were the EKGs of this patient? What exactly went wrong? Right? A diagnosis of that. But guess what? None of the doctors can actually go back and look at the finer details to say this is exactly what it went wrong. They could look at a patient chart and say, you know what, this was the medication that was given to the patient. Okay, what was the reaction to this medication? We don't know because I don't have the EKG waveforms from back then. Oh, this nurse gave this med. Oh, this was the IV that was put on the patient. Okay, what happened? So what? Did actually had an adverse event on the patient? No. And it was as simple as for us to say that if I can have a time machine and go back, right, to give them access to that data from a week back, 10 days back, 20 days back. Okay, with this cloud, can I go a year back and give their last 1 year's worth of data? And that opens up like so many opportunities, teaching opportunities for them to teach that this is what you not do, this is what we could have done better, plus also understanding their headache that they get with audits and stuff like that that happens in the US hospitals, and also in quality improvement programs. So that was one part that we started to focus on. The second part was focus if you've been in a, God forbid, if you've been in a ICU or something like that, right? You get admitted, and the the best healing aspect of any hospital should be sleep. If you can get a good sleep, you will heal, right? But you can't. It's almost humanly impossible to sleep well in a hospital, and it's because of this beep 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 that keeps going on. And if it's not you and it's your neighbor patient, it's so annoying. And you know what? 60 to 70% of that is nuisance alarms. It's useless. It's just telling me that the battery is low, or you know what, something happened here. I don't want to know this. Let me sleep.
Yeah, I sleep with earplugs in. I don't mess around. Sound is such a big influencer on your ability to sleep.
Yeah,
And like that must be really frustrating to see that and not be able to like solve the like bigger problem that causes that, right? Because you just want to go in and turn the alarms off, right?
yeah, you can.
And you
And my
can't.
point, our thinking on that side was like, what if I can take that last 6 months of data or something, or
Hmm.
even last 90 days of data, throw it in a spreadsheet and really find out what is actually happening. Why is there so many beeps coming out? And why can't I just figure the root cause of it and shut it off permanently or do something about it? Is it nurse education? Is it a process in the hospital? Or is it something else that we can do to fix this problem?
Buy them
Those
more
are two examples.
earplugs. Yeah, that's it like frustrates me because it's like, okay, even if you do have a good easy answer, implementing it isn't easy anyway, right? Like implementing, that's one of the other things you talked about is like one of the biggest issues the hospitals are having is like managing the implementation of changes or additions. So just to summarize here, it sounds like from your perspective, one of the biggest gaps hospitals have is like the administrative burden and like clear data pictures of patients, right? To have like a clear photo of not photo data image of all the things that Rishi in the ICU was going through, his EKG, what medicines he was on, his heart rate, and that stuff is just not. I thought there were so many companies doing that, right? Like, aren't there so many companies selling
So,
this idea?
so
Yeah.
electronic health records start to become those one-stop shop for all the data. But if you're a patient and you have, let's say, a ventilator connected to you in an ICU, not even 1% of that data makes it to the electronic health record. Less than 1%.
What?
Yes. So 99% of the data goes in trash can, right? And that's gold mine for any company to say that if I that's where the meat is. If I could take that data, it is a lot of data. It's like a gigabyte per patient per day for adults. If
Yeah.
I can take like that data and start to make sense of these simple things, you don't have to. We can help you fix the alarm issue. I can
That's
help you go back in time and look at what exactly happened to this patient when you gave this medication. Those are simple
uh,
things to do.
and that's also where AI can help because it can also help you be that detective that
Yeah.
will point out the trend that across hospitals and this is really interesting. I just want to take a quick break for a second and let everyone listening know that this podcast is brought to you by Yo-Yo's. You own your own stories, a documentary storytelling company that demystifies cutting edge technology with emotional human stories. That means we make things like patient testimonials and stories that go to film festivals. If you got a cool story to share, we can help you get it out there. So I want to transition a little bit, Rishi. One of my favorite things about you is that you're really open about talking about failure because you have this entrepreneurial mindset. And like in the beginning of this podcast, you were like, I tried a bunch of things, nothing worked, and I just, you have a very like matter of fact way with dealing with like problem solving instead of trying to go at something for years and years. You just kind of move on. So with this whole entrepreneurial mindset, tell me some maybe more specific stories of like failure and moving on in your work and like personal experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's not exactly a failure. I would call it a success because I'm like failure teaches you a lot, right? So this was so my friend, a Colombian guy, Carlos Mazo, and myself, we used to have a pretty hard ass prof in grad school, right? And this guy was like, he was an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, and he used to have a course wherein the only way to pass that course was get a purchase order, you pass, you don't get a purchase order, you fail. As simple as that. So you come with a concept, get a PO, you pass, don't get a PO, you fail. And the PO cannot come from your friends or family. As simple. And we came up with this cool idea of, hey, let's, you know what, there are so many students driving around with car aimlessly. why don't we wrap this car with an ad, and we can charge the companies like a Pepsi or a Coke or whatever, right? And then make money out of it. The dumbest idea ever, because students were like, okay, no, we're not driving around. Number one, I'm not letting my car wraps, because we were not teenagers. I was like 27 or something when I was in grad school, and Mazo was close to that too. They were like, oh, you don't understand teenagers. 18-year, 19-year-old is not doing it. Like, okay, that's a bad idea. So it was like the day before the finals, and they're sitting in our home, sitting in a bar actually. Like, you know what, we're gonna flunk this exam. And Mazda was like, don't worry about it. One paper gone. That's all good. And then we had this idea, like, let's call up the New York taxi company and say they got a bunch of taxis and they'll do it, right? So we call up New York taxi company and they're like, this is a dumb idea. Like, yeah, we already know that. So give us something new. And they were like, you know what? But there is some meat to it. And the meat to it is, uh, what if you put that ad on top of our taxi stands, those lighted stands, and that would fly. If you can get our, we always struggle to get that. So if you can get that, that'll fly. You don't have to work with us. You just directly work with advertisers and get this in. So we got it. They sent us a PO, and that was such a learning moment that we try to always come up about a concept from inside and then say this is a brilliant idea. The concepts always has to come from outside in, right? And that was a big learning for me, so I didn't necessarily fail.
Oh, that was the first time you were like, oh, I gotta listen.
I know, right?
Oh, okay. I just want to say this. There's all of these big companies have like innovation labs and startups and stuff, and like these little like startup generators and whatever you call it, like daycares and stuff. Why don't every accelerator do this? Like everybody should go through that experience of what you did. Like that experience taught you so much. I'm like, I think that's just so brilliant. Get a PO. That's all that matters.
Yeah,
Whatever it
and
takes.
the sad part was the prof asked us that, okay, we're like, okay, we got this idea. What do we do next? Prof was like, go say no to New York taxi. You gotta be kidding me. This is a big business opportunity, and it's like realistically, you haven't graduated yet. Are you gonna start a business? Are you gonna drop out for this? And we're like, no. So like, okay, so call the taxi company saying that we fucked up. We were just trying to pass an exam and be honest about it. And we're like, wow, being honest was so hard. So
Yeah.
we
Especially
called them.
when was it what was it like $10,000 or how much
Yeah,
do you remember?
this is
Uh-huh.
money though, right?
Uh-huh.
Being honest was such a hard thing. And
Yeah.
we struggled. And Martha and I gulped down like two beers and we're like, let's call. Let's go pick up the phone call. This guy is
Uh-huh.
like a real hard ass in New York, and nothing against New Yorkers. I get it. I'm a Bostonian. And we called him up, and he started laughing out loud. And he was like, "Why are you laughing?" And he's like, "I kind of knew it,
Uh-huh.
but your idea was good. That idea
Uh-huh.
would fly. So if you guys at some point want to do it, come back and we'll do it again." So I
Wow.
think Mazo and a couple
So
of his
being
friends did it.
honest was the right thing to
And
do. Uh-huh. Yeah.
the right thing, the right thing to do. The hardest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you talk about failures, I can keep going on for all day, right? There are many such situations where you fail, but those are the fun things. Those are the things you learn from.
So I mean, I love that story so much, and I think there is so much to learn from. Now, this was before there were these little triangles on top of every taxi in New York. Did somebody else jump on the idea after you guys? Or
No, so that's the point. We never did a good. Mazo and I just um, we're just not doing our job. Essentially, didn't do our research on how many competitors are there, who is doing it, what is the market opportunity for that. All the stuff we never did it properly. So I think the idea took off eventually, and the whole it also expanded to use. So you see car wrapping companies right now
of
doing that
course.
stuff. Well,
Yeah.
so this idea took off, and it also gave opportunities to many entrepreneurs to
Well,
sort of come back.
and then somebody said, let's put a TV screen in the back of the taxi so they can get even more ads in front of them. I just wonder, like, do you ever take a cab in New York and think like, oh, that could have been me? Or I'm sure you said Mazo is his name. I'm
Carlos
sure
Maza.
I'm sure the two of you had some impact on that innovation coming to life, right? You planted it in this guy's mind. I'm sure it had some reason. Um, So that's great. And so I feel like when I talk to you about your work, you've kind of taken this like jump on the beehive and just go for it and be honest and just do it mentality into your work. And that's probably why you're so successful. But it's like all of these things go against our innate nature. Our innate nature is to go in and tell them what to do because we know it's right, right? And not let go. And I mean, I struggle with this myself, right? Because we want to help and we think we know how to help. So like how to like sit there and listen and say, oh, here's the real problem. How can I solve this real problem for you? Um, do you have any advice for people in their like careers and kind of putting that stuff into practice?
Yeah, I think the whole idea of risk, it's a very subjective thing. But for me, I think it depends, varies from person to person. But understand your appetite for risk, right? And for me, it was easy because with the first startup I was part of, I've crashed on friends' couches, and I got to decide between getting a lunch or dinner that day, right? Two meals, pick one, right? A breakfast is a must, and then figure out or skip breakfast type of stuff, right? So I've gone to a place where like, what worse can happen, right? So the appetite is slightly higher from that perspective. Of course, I try to prioritize my kids and what I have to do in my life, but the appetite for risk is different. And that's where the fear comes in, saying that what if I say the truth and this backfires? That fear is the biggest thing one has to overcome, right? That's the big part of it. The second part is, I think, so one of the CEOs I worked for used to have this bold thing, and Steve Jobs followed it very clearly. His PowerPoints or stuff, whatever he did, it didn't have more than 6 or 7 words on a page. If you can't explain a concept to your grandmom, if you cannot articulate that concept in 1 or 2 sentences, you probably don't know that concept. And the point is, how many times you ask, like, so what do you do? And you go on a rant for like 20 minutes. Like, no, 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 what do you do exactly? Right? And that's the point, that it takes a lot of, the more you understand what you're trying to do, and getting to a point of, can I describe it in a 1 or 2 sentence in a simple way that my grandmom can understand?
Rishi, what do you do?
A corporate entrepreneur.
Okay, cool. Oh, he got it in 4 words. All right, everybody. 4 words. That's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is like be able to do that is one of the hardest things, right? We go to networking events, conferences, dinners. What do you do? I read in this book recently one really good way to frame it is say, you know how this is a problem? Well, I do this. I've really liked that. But I'm used to saying, well, I make documentaries.
Yeah.
Everyone goes,
Perfect.
ooh, ooh, interesting, right? But this idea of like, you know how no one actually remembers anything when you after you've shown it to them? Well, I make stories. People remember something like that. That's a sales pitch, but I think most people do really struggle on the what do you do?
Yeah.
Oh, I help businesses do stuff and then you've lost your audience, right? Because we don't remember it. I like what you're saying about like recognize your appetite for risk, that you got kids now and it's harder to maybe say things that you would have felt comfortable saying when you were crashing on people's couches. um, I think the hard thing is how do you maintain that bravery in a corporate world. Okay, if you were going to give a TED talk, what would the title be?
Wow. TED Talk. I haven't thought about
Okay, well, it's time to think about
it.
it.
My passion is to go and train the next generation.
hmm
And I would do a TED talk on my failures. I would do a TED talk on my failures, transitioning from a startup to a corporate life, taking a business from zero to something. What have I learned and where all have I failed? Because success stories are all over the place. But I would happily do a. The most comfortable part for me is is talking about my failures. I'll be very happy to do a TED talk. I'll be myself,
But that's
right?
what people want to hear, right? Nobody wants to talk about their failures. And it's like the most successful people in the world are the ones who've racked up the most failures. That's the secret, right? The most, like, that's how you get to it. How else? It's like The people who are the best at three pointers are the ones who've shot the most three pointers and missed the most three pointers. Um, so how I think this maybe I would say something like, being a corporate entrepreneur, like keeping an entrepreneur mindset wherever you go, right? Like this something that I'm just giving you this for free. You can just take that. All right, a couple more questions before we wrap up. Rishi, tell me something that you think is true that almost nobody agrees with you on.
Ah, that's an interesting question.
Thank you. Shout out to Varney.
I can't. I can't. Interesting. So is it weird to say that AI will take over our world one day?
Well, depends on how you think AI will take over because a lot of people think it will take over in a bad way. What do you think?
Yeah. I think in a good way. I think in a good way. I'm like people are pessimistic about AI and stuff like that. I'm like yesterday I was driving with my dad and I'm like, oh, you've seen this driverless cars? These are so bizarre and stuff like that. And today I think, or this month, there's a Chinese company is going to do an IPO. Driverless Chinese company doing an IPO in US, right? And I
Hmm.
feel that I can only imagine when cars came in and people were still doing horseback riding. They're like, oh, that's bizarre. The stuff you just press and it moves. It's so bizarre.
Yeah,
So I
of
think in a
course.
positive way, it will come in a positive way because I think we humans are smart at least to put some boundaries around what it can do and not do.
Yeah,
I feel it's going to
it
be a
depends on who you
positive.
talk to and what you think. I mean, I don't know. I go back and forth about whether or not we're putting boundaries around it in the right way, right? I don't know if we're doing that yet. But the more people I talk to who are actually doing AI, the more I feel that it's only going to improve our life, right? That it's just going to help us in ways that we don't even realize. But I also don't know if it's going to be quite as life changing, right? I would really recommend this book called Mana by Marshall Brain, where he talks about like a world where robots take over and everyone lives kind of in like government housing and the robots do everything. And then there's a world where people are free to do whatever they want because the robots
Yeah,
provide all
that's
the
the
labor.
point. My kids will come up and they'll say, "Hey, I want to do this. I want to do this." Like, I'm like, "Whatever you guys decide, that profession might not even exist when you guys get to college."
Thanks, Dad.
I'm like, okay,
Crush my dreams, Dad. Thanks.
it's fair enough. Like, yeah, you want to, my daughter wants to be a writer, and she's good at writing stuff. I'm like, great. How do you know AI is not going to do all the writing
That
stuff?
is so mean.
I know, but my point is not that. I'm like, as a human being, we need to understand what is our unique differentiator. What differentiates us, and where do we stand out from machine? Are we doing repetitive start, or is there a creative thing in our mind that we can leverage? The
Or definitely
creative,
our
there is no way to take over. That is
definitely our
impossible.
creativity. Yeah, that's the thing. We're really interesting. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's a deeper question is whether you think machines can replicate the level of creativity humans have. I wouldn't put it past the machines, but I would hope that the future holds a way for us to allow people to explore the things I want to do and make. And like that's my hope for the future, right? Is that we're replacing the time spent. What happened when we got email was, wow, this is going to save so much time. My day is going to be so much shorter. What has happened? My day's so much longer because I'm responding to 90 emails every day, right? So my hope is that it's actually going to replace instead of allowing us to work more. Right? How can it help us work less and enjoy our lives more and do more of the things we want to do and help people, right? Um, I have high hopes for that. When you say AI will take
Yeah.
over for good, I have high hopes that like society will change for good. That's what I hope. And with that, I think we're kind of at the end. This has been fantastic. I could talk to you forever, but Rishi, one last question. When we're talking about cool people, cool tech, cool stories, who do you think would be a phenomenal guest for the show?
Oh, phenomenal guest to the show. I think you should. I have to go back and look, but there are a couple of people I can recommend
Okay.
who are doing some amazing work with the healing of human beings. Right. The exact. So you talk about cool tech, but tech is so limited in the sense you think about it, and we don't
Yeah.
treat our body as tech as well. And there are people who are doing some amazing stuff on how do you use technology, how do you use to really get to the inner self.
Yeah.
and help people heal and become stronger internally. And that's again related to healthcare. So I'll probably send you those names. But those are some
Well,
really nice people doing so.
for those who are listening here at the end, is there anything you wish people listening to this podcast would do right when they're done listening?
Sorry, could you repeat that one more
What
time?
do you wish people listening to this podcast would do if you could get them to do one thing?
Be bold to talk about your failures.
Mm,
Be bold about it. You should have a medal out there. Like, I fucked up. I'm proud of it.
I can't tell you, like when I make documentaries about people, it's what I try to get people to share, and it's very vulnerable, right? There's always this fear that there will be this blowback. But what happens when you talk about your failures, Rishi? What happens?
I think I connect better. I
Yes.
connect better because once you cannot expect the other person to open up to you if you don't show yourself to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. It's so true.
I had nothing to lose. I had nothing to lose. You can
Yeah.
judge me what you want.
Well, we always think that if we say that we've messed up, that people will think that we're bad. But when we say that we've messed up, people trust us more because they relate, right? When we see people who are succeeding in their life, for instance, your career is really incredible, right? It's easy to be like, wow, I could never do that. Like I could never have like all these different giant companies I've worked for, all these cool things I've done and spun up and been but when you talk about your failures, it makes it seem accessible. Like, oh, maybe I could do it, right? I think that's what's important is like people need to take down the wall between them and what they want to do. And when you talk about your failures, it makes you human. It's sort of like how during the pandemic when people were on Zoom and you could see their dogs, so you were more likely to work with someone if they had a pet because it reminded you that they were also a person. I love that, right? It's like remind people that you're human. There's nothing to lose. I think it's a great way to
Yep.
end this podcast. So, thank you so much for listening to Cool People, Cool Tech, Cool Stories. I'm your host, Cameron Kitt. Huge thanks to Rishi for joining us and sharing your incredible story, your failures. You can check out show notes for links to, I assume, your LinkedIn and our website. Let us know your thoughts about this episode on social media using the hashtag #CoolCoolCoolPodcast. Rishi, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.